Hello and welcome everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Scottish Independence Podcasts. If you've been following our pre-election broadcast, you'll know we've been doing 2 a week for the last what feels like 6 months, but it's about 4 weeks. And this is the last one before the big day. So we thought it would be a nice opportunity to get some people together and just get their thoughts on what they're seeing, whether that's what's come through the doors, what they've seen on hustings or anything like that. So I'm delighted that we have Julian Smith, Lynn Dugan, and Marion Robertson in the studio with us. We've never had so many people on screen before, so it's very exciting to see how it's going to work. Or maybe just hand over and ask Marlene, first of all, what's caught your eye?
Well, one of the first things that caught my eye was the leaflet that came through from the Labour Party. There was two. There was a big glossy one that unfolded and became A3 size, double-sided, and must have cost a packet. And the other one was a smaller one for our actually, he's a Labour Party candidate in my constituency. He also happens to be one of my local Labour councillors. So yeah, that caught my eye, and so that's Eunice. Now look, Eunice is actually a good councillor, right? But on the other hand, he's put his name to this, or at least he's standing for Labour, and they've told him they probably said this is what's going on your leaflet. End the ATM rush for a GP appointment. Support our high streets and local businesses. Support our schools. Close the opportunity gap for every child. Now, no one could really disagree with that. I mean, I couldn't disagree with that. But then I also look at it a bit more closely, and I think, well, end the ATM rush for a GP appointment. Definitely things have got a bit worse, in terms of getting an appointment over the last year or so. On the other hand, that's just what ScotGov have just brought in, and a one way that will help with that. So it's as if that's not important. They're just saying, oh, well, we'll do that, and not saying, well, I suppose, to be fair, would they actually sit and say our opponents are actually doing that? Well, no, I suppose they wouldn't. Support our high streets and local businesses. People don't realise just how much support there is already for small businesses and in terms of council tax relief, business rate relief. So again, it's kind of a statement that you wouldn't disagree with, but you're not getting the whole picture. And support our schools, close the opportunity gap. Well, yeah, I mean, the opportunity gap has been closing for the last, decade. It's been brought gradually kind of getting closer so that, kids coming from, households with the least income are actually kind of doing better and better in terms of, exams. So I suppose what I started to think was, why does nobody put context onto their campaigning? Because if you don't know the background, you could maybe just take that at face value and look at that leaflet of Eunice's and go, oh, yeah, that's all good. I really agree with that, without kind of knowing the background to it. So it does irk me hugely that doesn't happen. So because I'd noticed that about the Labour leaflet, I just looked at it a bit more closely, and I ended up doing 4 separate TikTok posts where I basically debunked what was on it. So that picture you see behind me, it's taken from a leaflet that came through the door from Scottish Labour, and by the time you've unfolded it, you have a A3 double-sided glossy colour, quite good quality paper as well. They haven't shirked on the expense. What caught my eye? The headline above it says, across Scotland, people are backing Scottish Labour, and before folk just do a wee spiel about why that is. So look, here's Ailey. She says she'll be voting the first time in May, so she's only known SNP governments. Of course, first thing that I think then is, okay, so that means you haven't ever had the experience of Scotland being run by a Labour executive. But you have had the experience of, for at least 2 years, Great Britain being run by a Labour Party. So you need to take that into account. Anyway, she goes on and she says, it's clear that they, that's SNP, have lost their way and have no plan to improve schools or give young people
the best start in life. I read that and I think, oh, well, the lassies got involved in politics, that's a good thing. But, they've lost their way, they've no plan to give young people the best start in life. Where do you start with that? Right, okay, in a way it's quite easy because you start with the baby boxes for anyone who wants them, and then the Scottish child payment for parents low income families. And, if you just had a baby, the first year, that's a level now of £40 a week. That's being praised all over Europe as being so successful in reducing child poverty in Scotland. If they want to go to college or university, they don't have to pay college fees or university fees. That's quite a good start. They don't end up with tens of thousands of debt the way they would if they were living in England. I like context. I don't mind if someone says the SNP have lost their way and they haven't got any plans to help young people. You can engage with that, as I'm attempting to do. It's fine, but you need to put it into context, Ailey. Fine that you want to support the Labour Party, but ask them some good questions before they put your face on a poster and put this down it and
This is the Labour Party leaflet. It's very big, as I was telling you. Look, it's huge. Must have cost a whack of money, but then they do get money sent up from London to help with their Scottish elections. We're doing Better Call Saul now. Saul says, this is such an important election and I want my vote to matter. Oh, with you there, Saul, absolutely. And he goes on, I want a Scottish government that takes our country forward. Absolutely there as well. I mean, presumably you are talking about Scotland there, Saul, we'll assume that, right? That's why he's voting Scottish Labour, which is where he and I part company. Because I want all those things and I wouldn't dream of voting Scottish Labour. So he goes on, he says, I want an NHS that's there when we need it, opportunities for young people and the police back where they belong. So let's just think about putting the police back where they belong. That's all he says. That's all he says. Doesn't. So again, Saul, come on, context. I mean, presumably if you put like that, you think, well, they're not where they belong. Okay, well, how would you know that? How would you know if we've got an effective police service? I mean, I know there's been arguments about whether we should have gone down the road of Police Scotland or kept something a bit more, smaller areas or more individual police forces. But what about the crime stats? How are the crime stats doing? Stats. How are the crime stats doing? Saul, have you looked? Have you looked? It's easy to find. You just go on to ScotGov. Well, if you do that, you'll find that crime stats in Scotland have been decreasing year on year on year for a long time. There have been blips, of course, there are always blips in these things, but you could go back to 2007 and that's where the decrease started. So maybe, having the police on the street is a bit of an old-fashioned way of thinking about policing. It might be that they're better to be behind computers, accessing databases, doing all the things that you see when you watch crime programmes. Maybe better call Saul and the other Saul and watch a few crime programmes. So it's not policy, it's just emotion. It's just kind of getting people to feel things. And in the background, there's the kind of assumption, well, yeah, you're feeling that because of how awful things are, and that's all the SNP's fault. So there's a few other more specific things that caught my eye, especially one from Reform, but that's been in my mind, and it's not difficult to debunk it. One of these guys on the poster said, "Oh, how awful it is trying to get a dentist." So I just did a wee TikTok and said, "Oh, here's the facts about how many people in Scotland are registered with an NHS dentist. And it's on average, over all age gaps, men and women, it's something like 97%. What the SNP have done to our NHS is shocking. The basics just don't work. such as getting to see a GP or a dentist, getting treatment or an ambulance. All the SNP do is apologise. They don't actually fix the mess. Okay, let's have a wee look at that. Because, you know, context, facts, statistics, Amy, you have to bring them into the mix. I'm just going to do that in a minute. Here's some statistics for Scots who are registered with NHS dentists. Adults, 97.5% registered with the NHS dentist. Children, it's 90%. Remember, you don't actually register children with a dentist till maybe they're about 3 or 4, so you expect it to be a bit lower than that. But, you know, that's not a mess. In England, there is a problem, of course. BBC Breakfast was saying just a few months back, talking about queues around the block of people wanting to register with an NHS dentist, people taking their teeth out with pliers. Oh, God, it's horrible. But, you know, that is a mess. But that's not what we have up here, Amy. Then getting to see a GP. Yeah, it's not. It has got harder the last few years, definitely got harder. That's why the SNP are now rolling out on the street, 7 days a week, GP practices. You don't have to have an appointment, you can just go in. I dare say you're going to have to sit and wait for a bit, but that's doing something about it, isn't it? That's acknowledging that there is a bit of a problem and doing something about it. And that's going to be expanded all over Scotland. So, Amy, some questions for you. How many days of strikes have there been in Scotland amongst NHS workers? You know, nurses, doctors, porters. Do you know the answer to that? None. There have been plenty down south. Which part of the UK has the highest pay levels for their staff in the NHS, Amy? Scotland. That's right, Scotland. Which part of the UK has the most NHS staff, Amy? Scotland. So, Amy, you know, you haven't convinced me. So the whole thing just leaves me with a bit of a bad taste in my mouth, because I think it's underhand, it's not giving the full story, and it's letting people see things that actually you could easily kind of disprove. So that's me. That's mostly what I've been thinking about.
I think the Labour one, it strikes me how negative and critical they are. They've got no track record themselves that they want to share, so they just seem to try and knock down whatever the SNP have done in particular. And their problem is, I think, that in doing so, they're really running down their country. They're running down the people in it. It's very, very destructive.
Yeah. I'll just pick up on that, Fiona, because I was at a wee meeting just the other day, and it was a chap from this Alliance to Liberate Scotland. And actually, I mean, I think he genuinely believes in kind of what they're doing, and he was actually quite a good speaker. But he did that. He just came out with 2 anecdotes from someone's experience over in Glasgow in the Queen Elizabeth Hospital. Both of them, of course, really kind of at the extreme of what you might experience, someone not getting into a ward for overnight. And there was 2 of them, and 2 examples like that. And I said to him afterwards, look, why do you do that? Because you're just running down Scottish National Health Service. And this is at the end of the meeting, so it all finished. We're kind of going away. So I said, why do you do that? You're just running down Scotland. You run down the NHS. And he interrupted me and said, I know, it's one of the best NHSs in Great Britain. And I go, well, you didn't say that. Nothing that would give anyone any way of, you know, estimating just how bad a situation was. You just wanted to make people feel angry and fed up. And now I'm feeling angry and fed up, so I'm going to stop.
Okay, well, let's move on. What about Marion? Let's go on and ask you what's caught your eye.
You just said so many things there that triggered so many thoughts in my head, Marlene, anyway. I mean, I did marketing when I was at uni, and it's kind of stayed with me. It wasn't the best thing I ever did in my life, but it was still quite educational in a sort of practical sense. I can understand why people don't do it right on pamphlets and leaflets flyers for campaigning and stuff like that. There's such a lot that you could put into a campaign leaflet, and if you did put the context in, which I think is absolutely valid, your point, but it gets so wordy, it would look a bit like the one that I got today from the Scottish Socialist Party, which is absolutely rammed with text, and you just can't cope with that. And I just wanted to say as well that I mean I've been much more involved in looking at some of the socials of stuff on social media, and that is such a much better way of getting messaging across. It can be really tricky to get context into text, but when you're trying to kind of put across the message and maybe promote a candidate, there's so much more flexibility and effectiveness about doing something like a reel, which you've done a TikTok. I thought that was brilliant, doing that sort of thing. It's difficult, I think, from a kind of comms point of view, to put an awful lot of words around these messages without it becoming completely boring and just switching people off. And the other thing that I wanted to say was, when you were talking about the NHS and stuff like that, our own experiences, and I think I've chatted with you about this before, Fiona, was you draw on your own experiences for how you feel about, say, the NHS, a dentist or a doctor's appointment. I've never had any problems with either of them. And the people I've spoken to have largely said much the same sort of thing. So you can debunk in your own head what people have told you of their own experiences. So again, I think that plays into, you need to have leaflets through doors in many ways, because there's still a lot of people who don't go near being online. So you need to involve them to some extent in what you're trying to put across as a political message. But I think social media can really cut through to people in a much more upbeat and effective way than some of this leafleting that we get.
Julian, what about you? What have you been noticing around?
Well, what I did over the last two or 3 days is that I downloaded all the manifestos, at least half a dozen of the manifestos. And I've been wading through them, and my brain is absolutely frazzled. They are immensely long, over 100 pages in most cases, and they're repetitive and confusing. I've noted down a few things from them that I've picked out, and I've refined it, and I found it a really difficult operation. And what Marion was saying about too long didn't read applies in spades to the manifestos, because they are just so long. A thing that Marion said as well is that you relate issues to your own experience, and in my case, my experience is with a ferry, and I have never failed to get on the ferry to Mull. It's never let me down. It's not always been the ferry that I booked, but I've always got across. And I feel that so much is made of the difficulties that the ferry company have been encountering. But I'm not sure that the people making these allegations have really tried the service out for themselves and found that they were stranded somewhere, unable to complete their journey. I've never found that, and neither have my relative. We've been across regularly over the last year and never had any problem.
I love Calmite ferries. I've regularly taken the ferry to Arran, and when you come into the bay in Arran with the mountain to one side, and the tannoy welcomes you to Arran in Gaelic too. I've only come from an hour away, but I think I'm in a magic land. So I'm a bit biased, but I'm not so biased that I can't use statistics to defend Calmite ferries, because they need defending. They're getting a huge amount of shit, and it's completely undeserved. Today, the Herald, regularly, they have, I've got 18,000 Calmite sailings cancelled due to mechanical failures. 18,000. I used to teach 10, 11, 12-year-olds mathematics. If I said to them, is that a big number, 18,000? They'd say, well, it sounds like a big number, Mr. Robertson, but we need to know how many sailings there were altogether. I hope I get the answer. How many were there? I'd ask them. They go and find out 700 plus 1,000 sailings. What percentage was that 18,000? it was 2.3%. What does that mean about how many sailings were not cancelled? I hope they come back to me in a few minutes to say 97% were not cancelled due to mechanical failures. So the Herald thinks we're all bloody idiots here in terms of mathematics, but I think with a bit of calculation, a bit of primary 6-7 maths, we can find out what they're doing here.
So I've got lists of notes. I looked at education in particular, and because that was what I was a teacher when I was working, and so I have a fair amount of knowledge about it. And it was quite interesting, some of the things that came up about education in the manifestos, but they were very often hard to unravel. And I had to use a search engine to find references to education, because they're scattered over the whole documents. They're not well structured at all, in my view.
You just wonder how many people out there going about their normal lives are ever going to think about looking at a manifesto.
I doubt if anybody. I really, anybody has the time to look at any of the manifestos. The shortest one was the Reform one, because they had least to say, and it was 31 pages long. But the others were, I think the Greens was the longest at 130 odd pages. Almost like a mini novel,
Lynn, what about you? What's your take on it?
Well, it's been the volume of stuff that has come through the door. Online, what we've seen. What is interesting is like Marion saying, yeah, online you can get things across better. People are more likely to watch online maybe than read a leaflet. Maybe that's just the way we are these days. However, people can also say things, and if it's false, if it's an outright lie, there may be some comeback on it. So fairly recently, both Anna Sarwar and Wes Streeting had their knuckles rapped with regards to comments they were making about the NHS in Scotland, because the way figures are done differently in Scotland than they are in England, and they were told, no, you can't do that. But when they've said what they've said, it's out there. There's no guarantee that people would see any retraction that's been made, but I don't think they made any retraction, or the fact that they've had their knuckles rapped. That's what really irritates me. And then when I've looked at all these forms that have come through the door, and not only, I don't think I've had any reform like hand delivered. Everything has come by post. So they've obviously not got the the membership to go around and deliver through doors. So like Julian said, I'd started looking at their manifesto, and then what they've got on the letter, 6 points here about how they'll cut income tax, allow hard-working Scots to keep more of what they earn. Well, hard-working Scots do keep more of what they earn already in Scotland, and when you look at what we get with the tax that we pay, and I hate saying things, people say, oh, you get free prescriptions. No, we don't. We've paid for them. That's how government has decided to spend its money, and the bus passes, and they're all things to make life easier for everybody, not just for the few. They're going to cut energy bills. They will abolish VAT on Britain's domestic fuel. Well, how are they going to do that from Holyrood? They don't have control over that.
They're in for such a shock when they see what reserve powers are.
Put Scots first. Stop illegal immigrants being housed in hotels and give Scots priority. And again, you're like, well, we don't control immigration. It's not us that's putting these poor asylum seekers fleeing, whatever horrors are happening in their countries. It's not us that's putting them up in hotels here. It's Westminster that are doing that. And there's part of me thinks they're specifically putting them into Scotland to cause more issues.
Surprised.
I'm just kind of infuriated that they basically get to say that, or they get to say they're going to do these things, and that they haven't got the power to do these things should they win. So what are they going to do? Are they going to turn round like in the Westminster election, where Anna Sarwar said, we will protect Grangemouth, we will save the workers' jobs. And then when they didn't, and he was interviewed, he changes his tack. Oh, well, that's a private company. Because in this area, because we have Grangemouth in the constituency I'm in, and at the time it was John Nicholson standing for the seat again, and he said, it's a private company. I can't stand and say, as a member of parliament, that I will be able, what I would be able to do because it's a private company, which then Labour turned round to say later on. So, and a bit like just sort of reiterating what everyone's saying, that people will somehow take on somebody else's bugbear. They've had a bad experience, and you have to go, well, what's your experience been?
Yeah.
Have you had a bad experience? So like Julian's saying, never had an issue with the ferries. I'm not saying they've been perfect, and we have weather here in Scotland, so things have to change. But if your experience is people have tried to help and resolve it and you've got there in the end, then that's fine.
It's very easy to make a broad statement, isn't it? And say, oh, like ScotRail rubbish service. Well, I'm on ScotRail all the time, as probably most of you are as well. Almost never have any issues with them. They're clean, they're on time, the staff are friendly, the fares are reasonable. But it's easier just to lob a grenade in and walk off, I think. Well, that's everybody had the chance to say all the things we don't like about them. What about, has anybody got anything that they liked?
I'm just going to pick up from Lynn there just now, because this is actually a screenshot taken from a TikTok post. The other side of that leaflet has exactly the kind of things that you read out, Lynn. So I think it's maybe a different leaflet in a different part of Scotland.
Yeah.
So you get words like mess, crisis, stagnate, failure. That's not policy. That's nothing to do with policy. That's the thing again about telling people what to feel. It's not accurate, of course, but that's not the point. It's not trying to be accurate. It's just trying to get people to feel something. So you put all these words up, and then, of course, it provokes a reaction. It doesn't if you kind of are someone like us and you kind of read things round, or you kind of go, wait a minute, that can't be right. It just kind of comes up with a reaction. And in this post, Arena, the lady's name is, she's sort of talking about voting behaviour, and I just found it fascinating because she was saying, okay, there's what you'd call party model, so basically you vote for a party, and of course there'll be all sorts of reasons why, but basically you go, oh well, I vote SNP, or I vote, well, you should say, oh, I vote Labour. So there's the party model, and then there's the sort of model that's based on your background and your identity, how you identify yourself. Now, there's lots of overlap between these things, but that's the second one, sort of sociological model. And the third one was the rational model, where you go, okay, what is it that I need? What do I want? And will it work? So that's the third model. And then the fourth one is this one, which she says, this isn't policy. It's just telling people what to feel so that they'll turn away from what they might have done and start and maybe vote for you. I just found the whole thing fascinating, really. And if you're campaigning, do you try and just give a positive vision of how you want the country to be, or do you mainly say how awful the current government is? And I don't think the SNP and the Greens are perfect. Well, obviously nobody's perfect. I mean, you could pick holes in some of what both of them say, but on the whole, I think that's what they try and do. They try and say, this is the kind of country we'd like, and here's how we think we could do it. That's very different from saying, vote for us because there's a mess, a crisis, and a failure. So it's more of what I said before, but it's a very good example of it. Quite shocking. That leaflet's really shocking, I think.
Billboards, isn't it, where you see all the, they're trying, where they're portraying people as swarms of locusts and things. It's pure emotional manipulation. It's horrible.
Yeah. That's what it is. It's playing on emotions. But one of the other things, just go back to somebody else in my area. I didn't get the leaflet, but it came through, and it's their use of statistics. It's the old lies, damned lies and statistics. And what Reform are saying about the SNP record in your area, child poverty, 28%, and then it's got economic inactivity, 26%, and overall in Scotland, 23%. Back to what you said before about context.
Yeah.
Well, actually, some people would look at that and go, does that mean in Scotland 23% of people are unemployed?
And in case anybody's wondering, the unemployment rate in Scotland is 3.7%, which is lower than the UK overall, which is 5.1%.
No,
It's like me, I'm economically inactive.
Yeah, people who've got their pensions already, but even at that, one guy said, yeah, so because I'm below state and pension age, but I've retired, they're counting me as economically inactive. He said, I pay tax on my pension, my personal pension. I pay VAT and all the things I go out and buy. I go out and spend money in the community. So he said, I'm far from economically inactive. And in fact, sometimes people who are retired are more economically active because they've got more time to go out and spend and do things. And if you're, my husband always say these ruddy boomers, the pensions were triple lock. They've actually got more expendable cash than young people who are paying mortgages and all that kind of stuff. So to classify them as economically, inactive is disingenuous.
You're trying to pull the wool over your eyes, isn't it?
Right.
Yeah. Marion, have you got anything that you've spotted? I'm still going to have another go at getting us to find something positive. What did we like?
Well, yeah, a rabbit out of a hat moment. I don't know whether it's just because we live in the centre of Glasgow now, but I feel that there's only been one pro-union, two pro-union leaflets have come through. The rest have all been centre, left of centre, and I celebrate that kind of diversity. So I've got Alliance to Liberate Scotland, Scottish Socialist Party, I've mentioned them before, and we've got George Galloway and the Workers' Party. They're there as well, and of course SNP and the Greens. So they outnumber, just sheer numbers, they outnumber the unionist leaflets that have come through. And I have to say that, Tommy Sheridan, his little leaflet is properly balanced in a way. It's keep it simple, stupid. That's the message that you get when you're trying to put across fairly complex concepts to people in a short time. And I think his party's Alliance to Liberate Scotland have kind of almost done that. Along with the Greens, it's pretty kind of spare on text, but it's got quite a lot of detail in terms of logos and stuff like that.
Hold that up again. I just wanted the title, just as you read it. I've not seen that one, but A Better Scotland is Possible.
That's good.
That is a positive, hopeful sentiment, isn't it? Yes, I like that.
You were saying, Marlene and Lynn. I mean, I'd much rather go to bed at night thinking a hopeful thought than something that's negative and is pulling things apart. I want to believe in a better Scotland. I want to believe that we are in the early days of an independent nation. I don't want all the glib put downs. I don't want the trashing, all the words that you mentioned that are so emotive, Marlene, about negativity. I don't want anything I've got it up to here with that. I want to walk forward in a positive, optimistic sort of light.
We were speaking to Heather Anderson a couple of podcasts ago, and she mentioned that she'd been on a youth hustings, and she said the panel were universally describing to these kids what a terrible bin fire Scotland was, and how they'd absolutely no hope and no future, and how dreadful everything was, and it's all that SNP's fault, that kind of real negative stuff. And she said, funnily enough, the kids didn't feel that their future was completely destroyed. They were up for it. And I thought, thank goodness, young people are actually it's positive. Julian, do you want to accept the challenge of finding something good to say?
Well, yes. I might get pelters for this, but the there is a pressure group called Upstart. Have any of you heard of Upstart?
Oh, yes,
Yeah,
that's the
yeah.
school starting age at
Yes,
7.
and they have pressurised, they've been campaigning for a raising of the age at which children start formal education to 7. And anybody that's been to Leslie Riddoch's films will
Yes.
realise that she's always on about how in Scandinavia that's the starting age by and large. And the international comparison results of the education in the Scandinavian countries is generally very high. And could there be a correlation there? Certainly it's worth considering. And so I looked for this in the manifestos, and I did find it, but strangely not in the SNP one, but in the Lib Dems manifesto and in the Greens manifesto. Both of them mention this starting age at 7 rather than 5, which I thought was a positive sign that some people are listening to Upstart's pressure, their advice. And I think this is generally happening, but in an informal kind of way, that there is more play-based education going on in primary 1 and 2 than hitherto. And I think it's a gradual process, but they're the two manifestos that mentioned it.
I like, that's really positive in a way as well, because we've got a proportional parliament where parties are expected to work together, and that's perhaps the kind of area that you could see a degree of cross-party support.
That was really interesting, Julian. We've got a kind of vested interest in this very subject that you've touched on, because we've got a granddaughter. She's a little bit young for maybe primary school. She's 2.5, but it's a topic of hot conversation in our household. And my son and I have recently been down to the Gaelic school at Berkeley Street in Glasgow. As one of the 4 Gaelic medium schools in the city, and we had a conversation and an interesting little tour in the nursery. So we've been down to the nursery, and our granddaughter can start at age 6 if she wants to. They are more than happy to be flexible, and I think your point, Julian, is that people are using a little bit of the pragmatic head to work this out themselves. That they know that this is what children need: is more playtime, more social time, and less of all this curricular stuff and regimentation. And I think that school has got that sort of ethos written right through it. It's a wonderfully liberated place to be. I wish I could live my life again and start at that school, honestly. So yeah, it's maybe filtering in, like you say, just gently, gradually, but I think it's going to catch on, hopefully, in a big way, right across mainstream Scotland.
My experience, having gone back to primary school teaching as a supply teacher in the last few years, and one of my colleagues that I worked with 15 years ago, who's a primary 1 teacher, and she said, it's really changed since we first started, and it's much more play-based now. But what was interesting about the Leslie Riddoch film was when she was saying, again, it's back to context. The context of why children started school at that age was because we needed their parents to work in the factories. So the children had to go somewhere, and somewhere that was kind of safe for them. So they've got your education acts or whatever. But I think it was like factories and workers acts as well. We wanted people to get them in there. But things have changed so much. Years ago, when I was young, a family, you could have one parent working, and that was sufficient income to allow another parent to stay at home. And I don't want to go down this sort of gender bias and say the woman stays at home and looks after the kids. Invariably, it was that, not always the case. But one wage was enough to allow a family to live comfortably, to feed them, to clothe them, to have home, to maybe have holidays as well. Nowadays, you see families where both parents are having to work, sometimes more than one job, and they're barely managing to, scrape together. They're living, they're not thriving though.
Have you seen anything in the stuff you've looked at that got any hopeful signs that that's going to be, what's that, cost of living, cost of society, really?
they're going to extend the £2 bus fare over the whole of Scotland. That makes a tremendous difference, and I'm really pleased that, well, I'm pleased they're saying they're going to do it, but I also think they're making quite a thing about it, and I think they should have done a lot more about that when they took away the peak fares for the trains, because if you're commuting in or out of Glasgow and suddenly you don't have to pay peak fare in the morning, that's a considerable pay rise equivalent, you know. And I didn't really get why they didn't push it more. But anyway, they did it. Well, I think the initial idea came from the Green Party, if I'm right. And then the SNP, you know, worked with them to get it through. So I think there's positive things, and you know, there's more about expanding the free school meals again. There's more about expanding the nursery hours that you can get. But I think it probably is quite difficult for the SNP to do that. So I watched the launch of the manifesto, and then it got to the point with Mr. Swinney suddenly talking about, we're going to have a policy in there that will do something about the cost of living and, you know, stabilise prices for basics that everyone needs, you know, milk and bread and the rest of it. And I listened to it and I thought, oh, that's a good idea. And then a wee voice came at the back of my shoulder and said, they'll get pelters. I bet they get pelters for that. But it's kind of going somewhere in the right direction. Mm. And then since then, you kind of hear that in France, I mean, he was talking, I think it was about 50 basic items, I think. In France, they've done that with about 500 basic items. And in New York, Mayor Mandami, he's just come out with saying, oh, we need to make sure that people can afford the basics, and they're going to set up publicly owned food shops for folk that they can go and buy stuff. So, you know, that kind of thing's good, and it's left of centre, and it's trying to kind of help people. So
it's quite telling, isn't it, when the response, the thing they react against negatively, is something that would have the most benefit for the most number of people in the most need. And that says something about the people who are coming up with the criticism, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, just by way of contrast, I've got the Tory party leaflet, and it's just these leaflets are aimed at the people they want to vote for them. So I thought this was quite slick, because if you look at this, how are you going to save money if your annual income is between 15,000 and 50,000? Now, 50,000, they're going to save them £2,483 by cutting various taxes. And then the second half of the thing, this is how we will lower your bills by £2,483 a year. They're only talking to the people on £50,000 because that's the only ones that are going to save that amount of money. So it's just all funneling your attention into, you know, are you 50,000 and above? Here's all the things we're going to do. In order to come up with those savings, they say they're going to oppose tax rises, the imposition of any new taxes, you know, provide households with an annual tax rebate funded by unspent taxes. How do we have unspent taxes? Only by not spending it on things we need. It's anyway. I just throw that in because I just thought it's so galling how they can do that.
Fiona showed me that, and I got out the calculator and worked out what percentage, you know, if it's 550 quid you'd save if you're on 15 grand. And then, you know, you work out the percentage of what people are saying. And of course, the more money, the more income they have, the higher percentage of that you're saving. So it just goes completely in the wrong direction. Instead of shifting, you know, money into people's pockets who haven't got much, but when they do have it, they go out and they spend it in the local community, as opposed to someone who's on 55 grand, which I suppose isn't huge amount of money, but still you're going to have spare cash probably. It doesn't necessarily get spent in your local shop though, even your local corner shop.
Tossed on the pile.
I know.
The other thing I thought was quite funny, just looking at the manifestos, was Anna Sarwar, and he's clearly been in the dressing up box, because we've got him as some kind of oil rig worker. We've got him as a different kind of engineer. And then my personal favourite, this one. You know those scenes that you get where somebody's been wrongly imprisoned for 20 years and they suddenly are freed on appeal?
The long walk freedom.
Yeah,
Yes,
sort of bars
exactly.
behind him as if he's being released from jail.
I know,
But
I know.
think in his head, this is him walking into Butte House in Success, I think. In
Oh,
his
yeah,
delusions.
like that's going to happen.
He's got a picture of himself as a dentist.
Because our first ministers do wear scrubs, don't they, in the chamber? Oh, wait a minute. No, they don't.
A First Minister for Glasgow, he's got his dentist scrubs on, he'd have
Yeah.
us believe, really. I did get as far as going into the reform manifesto. So this is as you said before, Marion, too many words and you can't get them on the screen. So I'll just put it up. But this is from quite far on, and I picked it up from the contents, which is reform, saying they've got a set of Holyrood reforms that they want to do. So this is reform of Scotland, so a whole list of things, and it's what they're going to do when they're in government, when they're the Scottish government.
When? Oh, God.
Yeah, this is what we'll do, the whole thing. And the first one is repeal SNP bad laws, which includes hate crime and land reform.
We have to have more hate.
Yeah.
Well, reform the hate crime one, and reform and repeal the land reform bill, which took us years to get to it, and it's still got a long way to go. So
Yeah.
and then there was other things, but actually, what caught my eye was they also say in Parliament, so not in the government, but in Parliament, they will propose a reduction of MSPs by aligning constituency boundaries between Holyrood and Westminster, and that will reduce the number of Holyrood constituencies from 73 at present to 57. So that is 16 fewer MSPs. And I sort of read it and thought, well, it's way back. It's sort of almost at the end of their manifesto, kind of 35 pages. So this is page 25, I think. And I thought, wow, it's typical, isn't it? And they're also going on about they want to make Holyrood more efficient and more effective, and people should have to be made to turn up, and they have to be there if they're going to vote. They're not going to get
Like they do in the Lords.
Oh, yeah,
They're not going
exactly.
But the point is, of course, at the moment, sometimes still, I mean, people can vote remotely and they can take part in a debate, but they're not in the chamber, they're at home. They're doing it the way that we do it.
Nigel says something about we don't like people working from home. This is just a cop-out.
Well, they didn't do it in the 18th century, so why should we be doing it now?
So it's just, I just thought, wow, we probably need more MSPs in Holland.
Yes.
You've only got 129 to run a country, and you've only got half of them, if that, to run a government. That's not very many. Wales have just increased their number of Senate members, and have also moved to a proportional system. So that'll be interesting to watch what happens down there. And then you get these guys coming up saying, well, we're going to make it much more efficient. Oh, and we're going to reduce the numbers by 16.
You just wonder if that's just paving the way for also reducing the responsibilities, because we don't have enough MSPs to do them. Oh, let's not think about
Oh, don't focus on the negatives.
them getting into power, because it would,
Well, they won't. We know they won't. They will get MSPs though, and they might even get more than the Greens. I mean, we're kind of depending on the Greens to kind of really come through and be the second largest. But it'd be horrible if
Otherwise, we're all going off to Norway, are we?
We are, yes. I'm organising the travel as we speak.
Yep.
I just going to say, you were looking for something positive, and out of all the literature I've got, I haven't had anything from the Tories.
That's positive.
I haven't.
Nothing.
Yeah.
That's positive.
Nothing whatsoever. And at the moment, I've got them Labour saying in Clackmannanshire and Dublin, it's a 2-horse race between me and the SNP, and then you've got Reform going, it's between us and the SNP. So,
Anybody's guess.
yeah, that's it. That's it.
Guess.
But the other thing I liked, and Marlene had mentioned it earlier, was kind of the no context behind the sort of GP appointments. but they failed to mention, because they're not going to do it because we've already started doing it, the GP walk-in centres, which is a good thing. And it's just making people aware of it. And I know some places have been looking at what about the ferry stories, and all these, the number of stories that have been put in our mainstream media about ferries, but they don't mention HS2, they don't mention the Garden Bridge, they don't mention all these things.
That aircraft carrier that can't work in warm water.
Basically, one ship that they're all talking about called HMS Dragon, one ship,
which is going next week.
Right. There's one submarine, one working attack submarine, which was recently in Australia, which hopefully is beginning to steam its way back. There's an aircraft carrier, HMS Prince of Wales, but it ain't going anywhere at the moment because we're not really sure how to defend. There's only one out of two of those. We are supposed to have a non-combat evacuation ship, but that is in extended readiness in Gibraltar, and extended readiness seems to be a spin phrase for not operating. And the last one of our 4 mine hunters made it back without a crew, carried by another vessel back to the UK, and that's the end of all our mine hunters. So what can we actually do in Hormuz? We can't do any mine hunting because we don't have any mine hunters. We can't do any civilian evacuation. We haven't got a civilian evacuation ship. Our single submarine is pottering over from Australia. We hope, we don't know, it's under the water. Our aircraft carrier can't move, and this thing called HMS Dragon appears to be the entire British Navy.
Some of them, there's billions being spent and there is nothing. There's not even half a railway or half a bridge. There's just nothing. But that money has gone.
Has anybody got anything that they particularly wanted to flag out, whether positive or negative?
I get really, really excited about the thought of citizens' assemblies. I get so energised about that. And there's actually a citizens' assembly in Dunfermline.
Yeah,
and it's it's in Dunfermline. It's alive and kicking, and it's in the manifesto of the Scottish Greens. And I get so excited about that. Living in Glasgow now, it's so important for communities like our little community here in Woodlands to stick up for itself. And I think that could be the same for any community anywhere across our islands.
Absolutely. They did 2 presentations of the Dunfermline one when they got to the end of their deliberations and had their recommendations, and there was an open invitation to dial in, so I did, and it was the most positive, successful experience that they've been through. And they're not randomly selected, they're selected in order to represent the community, but brought together with people you probably wouldn't otherwise meet. And they'd come up with their, in order for it to be on their list of here's what we're going to do, it had to have something like 80% consensus. So that is quite a high bar. And the whole process of the weekend brings you to that consensus. They then organise meetings with the council or wherever else to make them happen. It was hugely impressive, and I would love to see that in other towns. In fact, we're going to try and follow that up with a podcast.
It depends on having competent and skillful moderation, or
yes,
to make it work. But if you do have that, and that can only come by experience, then people's assemblies, citizens' assemblies, are an excellent way forward. The community councils really, I don't feel, have performed the way they were intended to, but the citizens' assemblies would, I think, do a much better job of local decision making.
Yeah, I would agree, Gillian. Yeah.
That's a nice positive note to finish on, isn't it? So thank you very much for joining us, everybody. We know the election is Thursday the 7th. If you're seeing this and you haven't already done a postal vote, make sure you turn up and vote for your country. And let's see what happens.
Yeah, let's see what happens, and we'll find out on Friday. On the Friday when they start doing all the counting, won't we? But, yeah.
Maybe see some of us outside Holyrood.
That's right. I was going to say that. Yes.
Yes. Has anybody got plans to be at Holyrood on the Friday? I know Leslie Riddick suggested that.
I'd love to be there.
Leslie suggested a 6 o'clock.
6
meet,
o'clock.
because that's when the TV coverage will be. I think that's when the news coverage.
Okay, so
maybe John Curtis is going to do an exit poll.
Oh, I'm sure he'll have an opinion. Yes. how positive are you feeling about this election? In a scale of 1 to 10, how good do you think it's going to be for a positive outcome for Scotland?
I think that's a really hard one, Fiona, because
I know, that's
like Marion, I do want to be hopeful, but when I see some of the things that have been happening, the language people are using, the negativity, how people think they can be rude to other people and nasty about it, rather than going, well, that's your choice. You know, somebody, when I was delivering leaflets, said, I'd rather poke a stick in my eye than vote for whoever. And I went, well, that's your choice, and walked away. And I've also got in the pit of my stomach this horrible feeling that, not the horrible feeling that's not going to go well, but what if it doesn't go well? What are we setting ourselves up with? What we're going to, it's going to even be a longer battle to get to that country that we all want, that we know we can do. So
I think I'm fairly hopeful. I do think there'll be. I mean, I doubt that there'd be an SNP only majority. I just can't see it. It was a bit of a fluke when it happened before. But I do think there will be a pro-independence majority again in Holyrood. And it's, if the SNP do, pretty well, and if the Greens come up through and do even better, then that means it would be the biggest ever pro-Indie. I mean, and who knows, there might even be, a pro-Indie MSP from a different party, although, when you never know what's going to happen. So that could also happen. But then I think the crunch point is what happens at that point. I mean, Mr. Swinney's already said, first day of the new session, if he's still there as First Minister, he's going to be starting the process to, put forward a motion about seeking independence. That's good. It gets it going. But I think that if we were coming back here in a year and there'd been a pro-Indian majority then at Holyrood, then I would like to see something really substantial that had come out from it. And it might not be a referendum plan, but at least the people in Holyrood standing up for Scotland and not just kind of going along with what the Labour Party say down in Westminster. So I am optimistic. I think that'll happen. Actually,
I think I'm with you on that, Marlene. I think turnout, as you mentioned in one of your musings, Fiona, will be very important. So getting out the vote. Certainly going to be involved in that personally. It's always important, but I think more so, it just seems to get more and more significant with every passing electoral event that we maximise the vote and the apathy, cutting through the apathy. But in certain parts of Glasgow, certainly south side, that apparently I just want to go down and see for myself, because it's really energetic down there. I don't think there's any voter apathy that's been recorded. I think there's other parts of Glasgow where it is definitely a problem. But down the south side, and maybe other parts that you know about, Lynn, from your experience of the campaign so far, you might say the same about other areas that are really up for this election.
More people are aware of it, but I think since the referendum in 2014, we've become as a nation much more engaged in politics. We're not afraid to have conversations about it, or debates, even with I've got good friends who differ in opinions from me about independence, but they say you and I are politically opposite. I said, I think you'll find we're not. I think you'll find when we look at the things that we want to have, and it kind of comes circles back to the Citizens' Assembly, you'll actually find we're looking for the same things. It's maybe just a different way of going about getting to it.
Yeah. Good. Fingers crossed for what happens in a few days' time.
Excellent.
Right. Just going to finish off the fourth one of these Scottish Labour campaign leaflet chats from me, and today it's about John. Let's see what John says. So John is worried about where our country's going. He's worried that the failure, waste and scandal of the SNP that's right, the SNP, has made people angry and frustrated, driven them into the arms of Nigel Farage. And we must resist that. Well, yeah, John, we must resist driving people into the arms of Nigel Farage. And let's hope in this case that resistance isn't futile. But you think it's SNP that's driving people towards reform? Because does that work though? Because down in England, where reform has even more support than it does up here, there isn't any SNP. So what's driven them into the arms of reform down south? I mean, Tories? Yeah, well, could have been. And as you also say, the reform's kind of like recycled Tories, which is quite clever, actually, quite like that. But it does kind of indicate that maybe the Labour Party is part of what's driving people to reform, and that's what must be resisted. I'd have thought so. Anyway.
Thanks for listening, everybody. I hope you enjoyed that. If you want to make sure you're following us and subscribe to us, then you get notified every time we put something new out, so you don't miss anything. That would be great. Also, you can click the little bell if you're watching on YouTube.
And sign up for our mailing list. You can do that from the website, and we always send one out at the beginning of each month to tell you what's happening. Last but not least, you can buy us a coffee on coffee.com.